So I guess Tekken 8 probably is somewhere in the production pipeline. And that means once the novelty of what is almost certainly the final balance patch for Tekken 7 has worn off, it's going to be speculation season for what the new Tekken is going to be like. The folks over at That Blasted Salami have already made a pretty fun video showcasing ideas for what Tekken 8 could do with its characters and narrative, but I'm more of a game design guy, so while I'm going to be submitting my own proposals here, they're going to be focused on the hypothetical mechanics of Tekken 8. I've actually been kicking these ideas around for a good while now, so it seemed like a good idea to get in on this content train early. So, I present for your consideration my proposal for how Tekken 8 should handle Rage. Rage is a mechanic that's been around since Tekken 6. While you can technically trace it back to the Netsu power mechanic in Tekken Tag Tournament, Tekken 6 is where it really became a big deal for the series. The basic idea is that if you get beat up too much, you get some kind of damage bonus. It's been a somewhat contentious mechanic since its introduction, especially in Tekken 6, where it basically just let you do entirely too much damage when you hit the last 10% of your HP. But it's seen some pretty interesting iterations over the last couple of Tekken games, Tekken Tag Tournament 2 and Tekken 7, which is what I'll be using as my starting point for this proposal. While Tekken 6's rage mechanic worked on a pretty simple basis, you gain a 35% damage bonus in the last 10% of your HP, Tekken Tag 2 made the mechanic play a much larger role in the game's pacing and decision making. As a baseline, Rage in Tag 2 works pretty much the same as the Netsu power mechanic in Tag 1. If your point character gets beat up too much, your reserve character will have Rage activated for them, giving them a temporary damage boost, again at around 35%. But what made Rage unique in Tag 2 was that it actually worked in tandem with two mechanics exclusive to the game: Tag Assault and Tag Crash. Tag Assault is a mechanic that lets you call in your reserve character as a mid-combo assist, letting them perform one sequence of moves before leaving the screen again. This allowed for some insanely damaging combos, and was a huge factor in the game's overall explosiveness at high levels of play, but what's interesting is that the Tekken dev team actually knew that this would be the case, so the mechanic came with a few limiting factors. By activating Tag Assault, not only would you give up all of your partner's current red life, you would also give up Rage if either of your characters had it active, and you would immediately give your opponent's reserve character Rage. This is a pretty big opportunity cost, and while the damage was absolutely worth it in a majority of cases, there were enough situations where you wouldn't want to pay that cost to create actual decision points for the mechanic. Tag Crash, on the other hand, is pretty much the closest that Tekken, or any 3D fighting game for that matter, ever got to having a burst. While knocked down, Tag Crash was basically another offensive wake-up option to get around Okizeme, but with the extra benefit of only being punishable on whiff. It had a similar opportunity cost to Tag Assault though. It required your reserve character to have Rage, and using it would instantly give up Rage as well as any red life that either character may have had. The way Rage was designed to tie in directly with two tag-centric mechanics in Tag 2 created a really interesting and surprisingly complex push and pull dynamic that encouraged players to effectively treat Rage as if it were a resource. This Rage as a resource idea is something that wouldn't go away, though Tekken 7's rendition of this idea is much more simplistic. In Tekken 7, Rage activates the same way as it does in Tekken 6, when you reach 10% life. There are a couple of differences though. For one, the damage bonus is much lower, now only increasing damage by around 10% instead of 35%. The other big difference is that you can spend Rage on new attacks, the first of which is Rage Art. Rage arts were introduced in the first arcade version of Tekken 7, and effectively let you use the rage damage bonus in a more front-loaded sort of way, thanks to their high damage, which scales with your remaining life, as well as their full body armor, which gives them utility as a Hail Mary defensive option. As you might expect for a game that has historically never had them before, putting Reversal Super in Tekken wasn't exactly inspiring. So, in Tekken 7's first major arcade update, Fated Retribution, and by extension the home release of Tekken 7, players were given a second option to spend their rage on: Rage Drive. Rage Drives are effectively a kind of character-specific EX move, and these were much more well received for pretty clear reasons. They were mechanically much more unique and interesting compared to Rage Arts, with each Rage Drive complementing a character's strengths or covering for certain weaknesses. So, as the threat of Tekken 8 looms large over the horizon, we know a few things. 1. Rage probably isn't going anywhere. 2. Rage arts are probably staying despite their lack of competitive popularity because you gotta have cutscenes. And 3. Rage drives should stay because of the way they bolster characters' kits in unique ways while allowing for the Rage's resource dynamic. So this is where I want to put forward my proposal for how Tekken 8 should handle Rage. But to do that, we need to look at an eerily similar but totally unrelated fighting game. This is Samurai Shodown Sen. It's a 3D spin-off of the Samurai Shodown series that's basically just a really weird Tekken clone. Like, you can backdash cancel and everything, it's crazy. But the most interesting and unique thing about this game is the way that it handles the Samurai Shodown series' rage mechanic. Rage is represented as a meter that fills up as your character takes damage. When that meter is full, nothing happens. To get the damage bonus, you need to perform a rage explosion, essentially a manual rage activation. This is really cool, because it means that you can make strategic decisions about how you use rage, and the timings at which you activate to either mount a comeback or solidify a life lead. So, as you may have already guessed, what I'm proposing is a rage meter for Tekken 8. I know that this might seem like a bad idea given how super meters seem to pan out in Tekken 7, but stick with me for a second here. The idea is to expand on the Rage's resource dynamic by giving people more decisions to make with Rage moves, while still sectioning Rage off enough to make the mechanic have a meaningful but not too overbearing effect on match pacing. This meter would be called the Netsu power meter, and it would build up as you take damage. It would have two sections, signifying at which points you can spend the meter. With 50% Netsu power, you can perform a Rage Drive. Of course, I'd like for every character to have 2 or 3 Rage Drives, since you'd be given more opportunities to use them. At 100%, you can activate Rage, which will play a small, bespoke animation and last for about 6 seconds, during which you'll gain a 20% damage bonus, as well as the ability to spend all of your remaining rage time on a rage art, with the damage scaling down with the remaining rage time. This is the basic idea, but there's one other aspect of this proposal which is important to cover. Remember how in Tag 2, using Tag Assault would give your opponent's reserve character rage? That's a dynamic I'd like to carry over as well, so here's how that would be integrated into a solo Tekken with this hypothetical Netsu power meter. In my version of Tekken 8, players would have access not just to the screw and wall bounce mechanics from Tekken 7, but also the bound mechanic from Tekken 6. All of these mechanics would be limited in combos as the same thing. You can use a bound, screw, or wall bounce in a combo, but not any combination of them. This already creates space for on-the-fly combo routing decisions, but I would also add one more scruple to this system. Using any of these mechanics would give your opponent a flat 10% Netsu power meter, on top of the meter they're building by eating your combo. So, as well as allowing players to decide which combo mechanic is better to use in any given situation, players are also incentivized to think about whether or not they want to use any of them, just to deny their opponent the resource that could help them turn the tables. So that's my proposal. A bit complicated, sure, but I think a system like this would make for a much healthier and more interesting way to handle Tekken's staple comeback mechanic, especially since it lets people do the cool thing with their characters more often. If you guys have any thoughts on this proposal, or ideas for your own mechanical changes for Tekken 8, let me know, I'd love to hear them. Oh, and if by chance anyone from the Tekken dev team is watching this, feel free to use the ideas here if you like them. Please just make your netcode normal this time. Thanks for watching.